Good evening, everyone. Brian here again with BMK Retro Gaming. Now, as you guys know, you wouldn't usually get a second video out of me except for we have a special topic to go over, which is the introduction to gaming with the Atari 7800. Now, it was released to test markets in 1984 after being developed by General Computer Corporation, who were basically college students who enjoyed programming and making conversion kits to improve existing games. And they and Atari got into it a bit over it for a while, but eventually they got hired on and they were actually responsible for what would become Ms. Pac-Man, and they ended up being the ones to work on the Atari 7800 Pro system later on. Of course, after the 1983 industry and market crash, Warner sold the company to Jack Tramiel, who was a former founder and CEO of Commodore, and he at first refused to pay General Computer Corporation and put the entire project under review. He also didn't agree to pay them for the original library launch games that were developed, but after later on seeing the success, the potential, and then the success of the Nintendo NES home video game console, he relented, paid them, and we got a release in '86 of the Atari 7800 Pro system. Some things like a high score cartridge and keyboard, which were among some other projects which were either in development, pretty much complete, or being worked on, were canceled in this review, and some of them had already been advertised, so there was some disappointment for gamers with that. Now, overall, in the third generation, the Atari 7800 got about 12% market share, as opposed to the Nintendo NES's 80% and the Sega Master System's 8%. So it came in a distant second, but didn't do too terrible, due to Nintendo's licensing policies, which were later ruled monopolistic and illegal in the US anyway. Both it and the Sega Master System ended up what Nintendo had arranged was that their third-party developers with games approved for their console could not release the same game for a competing console for about 2 years. Though there were workarounds to this, and some things came out anyway, it still meant that both the Sega Master System and the Atari 7800 had much smaller original game libraries than the Nintendo NES. They both probably would have done much better if they could have gotten more third-party developer support. The overall original game library ended up being about 59 games, which is interesting as its immediate predecessor, the Atari 5200, actually had about a 10-game larger game library despite being considered less successful, so maybe it was a bit more successful than we were led to believe, or why were there about 10 more games for it than the more successful Atari 7800? Good question. Anyway, it ended in some cases it can do, at least graphically, better than the Sega Master System and the Nintendo NES, though not always. It has backwards compatibility with the Atari VCS 2600 and can play the majority of its original game library. And this was done a lot by reusing a lot of the same chips, including the TIA sound chip, to make it into a partial hardware clone console of an Atari VCS 2600. This meant that the sound was usually not much better than that one, but there was the option, and was used in 2 games, Ball Blazer being one, I forget the other, for a Pokey sound chip to be used to have improved sound quality, which that was also used on some homebrew games, which, by the way, the system has a pretty strong homebrew community. Maybe not as strong or big as some others like the Atari VCS 2600 homebrew community, but good. I don't have any of those yet, but we'll get into them after a bit. Anyway, basically, there are some games that with the backwards compatibility that don't work right, at least not without modification. Like some games from Activision, the cartridges are not quite the right size. A modification can help with this and enable it, but other than that, it plays the vast majority of the Atari VCS 2600 library, along with its own. So that was a plus. A complaint with the Atari 5200 had been that it couldn't do this without an adapter, so that had been seen to. Anyway, let's take a bit of a look at it here. It's very nice, kind of like the 5200 has this big, nice metallic strip with a kind of rainbow streak going through. You have a, come on, focus. There we go, a bit better. Not quite. There we go. Power button, a light indicating power, pause button. Nice, with the 5200 was the first time you got a pause button feature. Select button, reset button. 2 controller ports. I'm guessing these right here are for the difficulty switches, I think. On the side, you had an expansion port, which I think was for either the keyboard or something else. I don't remember. In some models, I think it was filled in because it wasn't really used for much, if anything at all. It has a cartridge slot that, well, Atari VCS 2600 cartridges and Atari 7800 cartridges were roughly the same size, so. And it works fine with that. On the back, you have the RF connection, which is how you plug it to the TV back in the day. And you can see here is the port for the rather proprietary power supply. It's also a fair deal smaller than the Atari 5200, but still a pretty big console. Here is our power brick for supplying power. It's pretty standard, but like I said, it has a completely proprietary connection to it. There are modern substitutes in some cases, but without one of these, this baby isn't going to work. But it generally works pretty well with it. Mine works fine. Then you have the standard, this is the RF connection. Here, you can see old school RF there. And here we have, this is the RF to coax adapter, which can hook up to a modern TV set. Not the best method, but it works fine with mine and puts out a pretty good picture. This one came with it. I had one for my Mattel Television 2 already, but this one works just fine for this one, so having a spare can't hurt, though this one is a bit of a different model than my other one. And, of course, we have the controller, which is the Atari 7800 Pro Line controller. It's pretty cool. Here you have a pretty nice, sturdy joystick, which allows a good degree of movement, but not crazy. The fire buttons on the side oftentimes had the same function, but sometimes one of them would have a different function, depending on the game. And it has a 9-pin layout, which was pretty common back then. My two actually work pretty well as far as I can tell, and control pretty good. Anyway, that's basically our little overview of gaming with the Atari 7800. I'm going to include a link to my one of my preferred YouTuber, Tyler, His YouTube channel, Player One Start, has a much more thorough and in-depth review of the Atari, review and unboxing of the Atari, or maybe even breakdown of the Atari 7800 Pro system. You guys know me, mine's, I wouldn't say entirely bare bones, but I take you over, just a basic overview. A lot of guys like Tyler will go into much further detail and background and everything, and I respect that. I know I'm not quite on the level of a lot of my preferred YouTubers yet, but we're getting there, I think, over time. I will also include a link to the Wikipedia article on the Atari 7800 so that you guys can take a look at that if you'd care to read up on it any further. And, well, if you guys enjoy my content, please like, share, and subscribe. And please leave any questions, comments, or suggestions in the comments section below. I'm very open to feedback, whether positive or negative, and would love to hear from you. So you guys have a good evening, take care, and I will see you again in my next video.